everyone. Welcome to this episode of Carolyn Talks. I'm your host, Carolyn Hayes, film critic and journalist. And this is the podcast where I talk to film creators about their work, the industry, and what inspires them. And today I am going to be speaking with director and writer Bomani J story about what inspired him to create his debut feature film, The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster, which is a very exciting but also very creepy. There's one particular little girl in there that's very creepy horror movie. This is honestly, I don't trust children when it comes to horror stories. Anytime I see a child, I'm like, I don't trust you automatically. I don't care who the villain is. So, so Bomani, can you tell us a bit about what inspired you to create this story?
Yeah, and like it started with the literature. It's like the original book by Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I read it and was so impacted by it that I just knew I needed to do something with it. And like the themes resonated with me, and like the characters, like I just loved it so much. And you mix that with a little bit of I have two older sisters that I grew up with who shepherded me and were kind of my first contact with intelligence, and mix those two things and ta-da, how you like me now?
Ta-da, I like it. So the thing about this film is, as you said, it's inspired by Mary Shelley's Frankenstein's monster. And we always got to remind people the story isn't about the monster, and the monster's name is not Frankenstein. Frankenstein is Excitus. And in this story, the Frankenstein is a young Black girl named Vicaria, played by Leah DeLeon Hayes. And I think she did a fantastic job, because the thing with this with her character is she's very dark, and she has a very dark aura and a very dark outlook on life. And this dark outlook on life she has been created because of the situation she's in, because the community she's in she's surrounded by danger. She's seen extremely traumatic situations happen right in front of her eyes. And being a Black girl living in America, the world is dangerous, so she has this seems like a very negative and a very pessimistic outlook on life. And she particularly has what seems to people to be this obsession with death. But I actually don't see her obsession with death as being necessarily unhealthy, because she calls death a disease, which I think is interesting for you to have it termed that way, because normally people would say death is the symptom. So talk about making death the disease rather than the symptom of the situation that she's in, of the environment that she lives in.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that first of all, it's like that line to capture the emotion of what she's going through. Not only was it that to kind of contextualize it as her kind of mantra, however you say it, but it was also, my homage to one of my favorite films, The Fountain by Darren Aronofsky. So it's like mixed with all that. But I think that she, because of her obsession through, and this is how she processes her grief, and I think that her coming to the conclusion that death is a disease, I think, is because it's robbed her of so many things. And I believe she, as she states, I believe she thinks that is the ultimate problem, because as long as death is not around, we don't got nothing to worry about.
Right. And because she thinks that death is curable. She looks at it as, like, people would look at it as almost like a cancer. It's a cancer that needs to be cured. It's a cancer that needs to be taken out. But the thing with cancer is a mutation. Cancer starts as a mutation in cells, whereas the death that she's talking about, I guess the mutation would be racism, as structural as systemic racism. And I think it's a very interesting way to have it symbolized that way. So while you were writing this story, did you talk to anyone about having death be the disease, and having in essence racism and anti-Blackness and systemic and structural racism and anti-Blackness, both from like a community level to a macro level, considering the government and police state? And like, what kind of conversations did you have with people about this particular aspect of the story?
I love this. Look, when I was writing this, I was like, of course, like there's my own, experiences, and, talking to my sisters, and as well as just, my own research. And, it's like being Black in America is just going to give you a certain outlook and make you think about these things, and as a writer, you're going to try to capture certain thoughts. You know what I mean? So it's all going to play a part of it, you know, and to say whether it's one of these things, two of these things, or all of them, or none of them, you know, I definitely want to leave that up to the audience to decide, you know, on how they feel about it and their interpretations of it, because I think that that's part of the beauty of storytelling and cinema is you are able to have these grasps and these interpretations. Now, I think these things are without a doubt part of the conversation, you know, and I think I would be being dishonest to make a movie that's so embedded within the culture without that. You know what I mean, in some shape or form. So I hope that kind of answers your
It
question.
does. I know you're trying not to spoil it, but yeah, but no, it does, because like these things are unfortunately inherent with society. Like even me living in Canada and Toronto, and even coming from the Caribbean, from Barbados, like these are situations that I grew up around, you know, like in like, for instance, like in this story, like in her community, she has what we would like back home we would call the fellas that live on the block, which is, you know, like the gangsters, and like they hang out and they have their own little enclave, and they have they're controlling their territory. And that's a systemic structure as well. That's an oppressive structure. But that's a structure that was created as a symptom of the larger issue. But like those guys themselves, they're trying to survive in their own way, but they're not seeing how they're being oppressors as well. So like I think like you handle that balance very well. You show like both the micro and the macro level, and how for Bakaria and like even the young boy, like there's this little boy that she talks with, how they get caught up in the system too. Like they're literally being caught between a rock and a hard place, you know, and like they like you, this is a story you can't like, who is the real villain? You know, what's the mutation that caused this disease of death, you know? And the thing is, and talking now about the guys that live on the block, on how they affected her personally, I want you to talk about that representation on how there's two characters in particular, but one in particular played by Denzel Whitaker, this character of Kango. Like you give him a little bit of depth, you know, like which isn't expected. You're like, he is the main boss on this block, you know, he has his gang, he's running drugs, but you give him depth. So talk about making sure that for the audience, you say that all of these Black people matter, which is basically what's happening in this story. Like every single character, every single Black person in this film has their own story, has their own narrative, and has their own purpose.
Well, I think like, you know, I think that comes from two places. One, you know, it's just, to me, our humanity is important to be seen across the board, no matter who we are, whether we are achieving high, you know, degrees at prestigious universities, or we're in a prison cell. You know, it's like our humanity matters, you know, and we need to be treated as humans. And so always capturing the humanity of someone, especially of our own, I think is important to showcase. I think a lot of people, when they first think of like a gangster or something like that, they think of them just sitting there mean mugging and, you know, just, you know, it's just like, but gangsters be laughing too. And they have mothers and fathers too. And they have brothers and sisters too. And they have children, you know, they are fully, you know, realized human beings walking through this world. And they are moving a certain way because of certain situations that society has done. And I think the faster we understand that, the better off we'll be to be able to help, you know, these people who need it, you know. And I think misrepresenting them only just pisses people off by not showing their humanity. So, and then, you know, past that, just from a fundamental filmmaking and storytelling perspective, I just think that trying to give, or aspiring, at least for me personally, I always want to aspire to give characters, you know, some kind of depth, you know, and really search for their humanity and why they are moving the way they are moving. I think that is you know, for me at least, that is a staple of good cinema. You know, it's just like that. It is a staple of that I always want to try to aspire to have.
Yeah, because in saying all that, the thing about Kango, which I think was so interesting, the decision that you made, like he is the one that kind of holds Bakari accountable for some of, well, not even some, but all of the decisions that she makes, because she makes some very questionable decisions. And he's the one that literally, like, as the audience we're watching, say, girl, little girl, what are you doing? Like, this is like crazy. And he's the one that says that, he's like, you're crazy, like, what are you doing? Right. So I thought that it was interesting. And the scene, like, it plays kind of humorous, and because it's more like situational humor, because it's in that moment, like, it's he's like, what are you doing? This is crazy. But it's very serious, because you're having this person that she also in her heart holds so much animosity for, and she herself sees as a villain. She doesn't see herself as a villain, but he's seeing her as a villain because of the things she's done. He's like, what you're doing is monstrous. He's like, you're a monster. In essence, you're creating a monster. And she's telling him the same thing. She's like, you're a monster. The things that you do are monstrous, like you're selling drugs. But I just had a light bulb moment. So like, she's like for her, the drugs that he sells turns people into monsters. They're like walking zombies, because that's what drug addiction does to people. And like, what she's doing is basically the same thing to her brother, like she made him into a walking zombie. And they both have this they're both like two obtuse different sides of the same coin, and they're both right and they're both wrong at the same time. So I think that's a beautiful dichotomy, and a beautiful example of the complexity of these characters that you're saying. Like these are fully realized human beings, and Black people are not one-dimensional, and we're not monolithic, and we're very complex, and like there's both the good and the bad aspects to these characters.
Yeah, no, I think again, it's always important to understand that everyone has their stance and their viewpoint, and they're coming from a space. And I think it's very very rare for someone to kind of be like, I'm wrong, I know I am wrong, and I am pursuing wrong, right? Like, and I'm, and I'm standing on that, right? I think most of the time people, whatever the argument may be, feel like they're right.
Yeah, like they're both convinced that they're right, and me as the audience, I'm like, you're both wrong. Like, you're both wrong and you're both out of order.
Yeah.
and it's talking about like the duality in essence, and the dichotomy and the differences and opposites and similarities and opposites to these characters. Something that really stood out to me watching this film is the use of color. Now, I noticed that red plays a very, like, the predominantly red, and a color teal as is like a light version of teal, play very prominent roles in the costuming as well as the set design and production design of this film. So like, I want you to talk a bit about that, because I saw the red as being representative of her rage, her anger, her grief, death, blood, visceral, all of these things. But the other color, teal, which I find, which is used more in the family rooms, like the dining room and the living room, has more teals. And the character of Aisha, played by Riley Brooks, said like a lot of her clothes has a mixture of both colors, of both red and teal. So I talk about working with your production designer Mark Bankins and your costume designer Kaylee Brenneman about incorporating these two colors and what they symbolize to you. Because I'm still thinking about what the teal possibly represents. I was thinking advocacy, but I'm like, not exactly.
No, like shout out to Kaylee. She was our incredible costume designer, and she added so much to this. I remember when I originally wrote the script, because let's just say it was for a much smaller budget that I was going to do. I was going to do it on my own for a much smaller budget. And the only costume I really had was just like, she was just like in one kind of fitting or whatever. But Kaylee came, and like, it's like once we were able to secure a little bit more financing for it, she really brought her personality to life through the costuming, especially Vicaria's, and we definitely talked about who she is as a human. What will she be wearing? I even think about what she would be listening to, and like these things all came into play. And even down to her backpack, and where that came from. Like, these things were all thought about. So like, shout out to her for what she did and really bringing these costumes to life and making them feel alive. And but it's like, as far as Mark Bankins as well, like he did a phenomenal job with the production design, and the colors were something we definitely talked about. It's just like the colors we wanted for all these different spaces. However, it's like, what I will say is that like I understand colors to have different meanings. As you said before, yes, red can mean anger, it can mean death, it can be blood, it's just like, it can be gang related, it can also be passion, it can also be love, and it can also be a lot of these things. And so, um, stuff like that was definitely in my mind when it came to the color palette of whether it's Vikar's home or Kango's home or even Riley's home. So like, but I don't want to lean one way or the other too much because I enjoy the interpretations. It's just like for people when it comes to the color spaces of these rooms and what it means to them.
Mm.
But yeah, so just under just know like if you are reading into it and looking at it, these were all thoughts that were going into my head. So like, but I respect the relationship between the story and the audience.
Yeah, I'm the kind of person, I always talk about this, but I'm the kind of person that if I see a vase or a cup or a shirt, I'm always like, does this have a deeper meaning, or is this just or is this thing just a thing? I'm always
Yeah,
curious about the meaning about it because, like,
yeah,
for all of these things are very intentional.
yeah. No, that I will. That's the only part of you that I will answer. The colors were very intentional on who they were with and why they were there. I don't want to answer that because I think that's part of it's like part of the entertainment of movies and like the relationship between the movie and its audience. But I will, you're not crazy for thinking that with this movie. I'll let you know that.
Knowing people more curious what the teal means, darn it. I know you have to get ready to go because I know you're having a busy day today. But thank you so much, Bomani, for taking the time for speaking with me, and thank you for making this film. I'm sure you're gonna get a lot of interesting reactions, and like you seem to be the kind of filmmaker that just loves watching people's reactions and see what they really think and all the different theories that people are gonna come up with for this film. And I know there will be a lot of theories about what this film is, which I think is great. Because everyone reads into films differently. Every story is like has its own identity. So I myself can't wait to see what other people think about this film. But again, thank you so much for speaking with me.
Oh no, thank you so much for putting this down. And like I love your questions. I love how you feel about the movie. I love how it makes you feel, and like I love your thoughts on it, man. Like yes, like I hope you write a piece on it.
I'm gonna pitch it to someone to see who takes it. But
Yeah, please. But no, thank you. I'm glad it resonated with you. You never know. So like I'm always like I have to humble myself to audiences. It's just like because as much as I have hopes and dreams while I'm going to be writing something and creating, I just don't know for sure how people are going to react. And whether they're going to be involved or not. And I always want to humble myself to that. So I'm very grateful that you responded to it and it connected with you, and it's amazing.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm gonna let you go now before being cut off.
Okay.